welcome to the Brattleboro, not a breakfast, citizens breakfast. Today we'll be talking, and according to an email that I got from someone, hopefully having a full and fair discussion about the vote on Act 46, which will be coming up on November 7th. We don't want to make it an attack of sides or an assault on positions, but a way of sharing what the issues are, putting the issues on the table in front of us, and trying to look at them objectively and come up with a decision if we haven't yet already made one. Voting started October 18th, and it will continue until November 7th. In this room, November 7th, 10 to 7. The last education vote we had, which was the Vernon exit vote, had a 3% turnout. So one of my motivating factors in having this discussion was to see if we could move that percentage up a bit. There's been a lot recently on Act 46, on WKVT and BCTV. So maybe there's more interest this time in this vote. So, few housekeeping things. If you have questions, there is a microphone set up just as it is at the select board meetings. And if we get time for audience questions, please come up to the mic, identify yourself if you will, so that the camera and the recording will be able to indicate that you're here and what your question is. No food or beverages allowed in the select board meeting room, as I've been told to state. So courtesy, this is all courtesy of BCTV. Catherine Turnus is our videographer. Today we have with us Jill Stahl-Tyler, who is the Brattleboro Town School Board Chair and Act 46 Study Committee voting member, and David Scholes, Brattleboro Town School Board member and alternate Act 46 Study Committee voting member. There were some questions that some of which were emailed to me prior to this. I'm going to try to keep to those questions. They fall into three categories: cost savings, local control, and alternatives. I'll try to keep to about 10 or 15 minutes for each category. Before we start, I wanted to ask if Jill and David would give us approximately 1 minute, if you would, just to state your position and the most salient reason for your position on an Act 46 vote on November 7th. And who would like to start? We could flip a coin.
Go ahead, David.
Okay. Well, I think probably the most important point to make about Act 46, whether you hear information from me or from Jill, for the most part, it's going to be what we think is going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And there is some track record of school consolidations, and I'll share that information. I think so it really is up to voters to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of their experiences and what they think is important for our communities. The other thing I wanted to point out is the problems with the law itself. Act 46 had, it really was a classic example of trying to make one size fit all in a very complex situation. And Catherine, I don't know if you can get up to this, and you almost don't have to, but you can see it's a map of Vermont. And the yellow, this is as of April, the yellow is the school districts that had not yet been able to figure out how to do this, how to consolidate. And up north here, these aren't gonna, it's a 13-member supervisory union that's already developed or developing an alternative plan, and they're not gonna even attempt to merge. So it's been a difficult law to make work. We were described as seeming like a no-brainer by the Secretary of Education. Turns out that if you've got a choice town, it's not so easy to do. In fact, you can't have a choice town. And turns out that if you have, nobody anticipated that having a really large town and a bunch of small towns would bring up issues of how to represent people fairly, how to make it actually work. and what to do about significantly different tax rates. If you equalize them, some people are going to see a big increase and some people are going to see a big decrease. They didn't consider those things, or at least they didn't put them in the law. They didn't put solutions in the law. So that's really why we're here. I don't think that there's any question about the goals, that whether the goals are sound. I don't think there's any question, although people have raised the question, unfortunately, about the motives of people on all sides of this. And I think the initial motives is what's best for the community and obviously what's best for the kids. And I think that goes without saying, and you'll see that that's in the proposal, in the merger proposals, and that's in everything that I say as well. We all have that same goal in mind. And I guess that's enough for now.
Okay.
More than a minute.
Jill.
Thanks, David. And I think you'll find David and I have some things we definitely agree on. We've been on school board together for I was
Doing this
trying
for
to
a
count.
while.
8
Yeah.
years?
Yeah.
I need to figure that out someday.
And we've sat down together and talked about things a lot over that time.
And one of the people last night I was talking to this about this topic, and he said that he was struck by how we all come at this with the best of intentions, but yet somehow come to different conclusions. And I think that's true. I don't think there's anybody out here involved in this and putting in so much time that has anything but the best intentions. So for me, with the passage of Act 46, it was a charge to the local school boards. You have to look at this, and you have to look at complying with the law. Frankly, I came to the table as a study committee member because I feel like as a school board member, I have only two roles. I need to make sure that we have a good education at a cost that our taxpayers support. That's it. So that was the charge, come to the table, and along the way, I became convinced that the merger actually meets these two goals really well. I didn't always believe it. I flip-flopped a lot of times. Every person on the study committee is going to tell you that we flip-flop back and forth mentally, even if we didn't look like it on a tape. But there was lots of going back and forth. So after 2 years, maybe 2.5 years of meetings, hours of analyzing data, I can't count how many hours of discussions outside. My husband's sick to death of hearing about it. I feel like we've crafted a merger that promotes educational equity, sustainability, especially for small schools, greater efficiency, educational opportunities, local leadership, takes advantage of monetary reasons that we should look at this merger. I feel like we keep local identity, we increase local collaboration, we control our own destiny, and we support students and families. And those are the reasons why I'm supporting the merger. As a study committee member, I can't sit up here and tell you how to vote, but I can explain how we came to that, and that's what I'm going to try to do.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about cost savings first. What is the amount of the projected cost savings if we do a merger?
So start with me on this
Yeah.
one? So looking specifically at the merger that we have proposed, the amount of projected savings, and we were talking about that with the Finance Committee just yesterday again. First off is the tax incentives that are in the law. That's 8 cents this next year, 6 cents, 4 cents, 2 cents. It was 10 cents. Before that, we've missed the 10 cents by not voting by July 1st. If you look, and people can question, and I imagine David might, question exactly how you come up with those numbers. If you look at that and you just strictly take the grand list and you apply it mathematically across with no other assumptions about whether money is going, taxes will increase, no other assumptions of what the contract negotiations will show up, any of those assumptions on income sensitivity, and just take the math straight across, that's $904,295. That's for the town. There's a transition grant that we would be able to receive if we go forward and vote yes. That's $150,000. There's retaining small school grants, which we do not receive in Brattleboro, but as a merged unit, all of the money comes to one place. So those would be coming into a merged unit. That's $80,000. And then there's immediate annual costs through more efficient use of staffing. There's also such basic things as less audits. We're definitely right now 7 entities, and we would go to 1. But looking at just the more efficient use of staffing, it's $140,000 this coming year, or $1.4 million over the next 5 to 10 years, depending how you look at that. It's estimated at 1 to 5 annually. $100,000 is the 1 to 5%. Sorry, annually. $100,000 is a low number. Do you want me to go a little further into that,
Well,
and why and how that comes, or?
Let's see if David has a response to that.
Well, again, to go back to where I started, we're talking about projections. What's likely to happen, and what do you think makes sense? The incentives that the state's offering, the 8 cents and the $125,000 cost, the Agency of Education and the Secretary of Education said very clearly people should not consider those tax savings. They're going to be consumed in the process of transition. So I think, again, how much is going to get consumed? We don't know, but that's what the agency is recommending now. They're saying don't talk about it as tax incentives. They're not incentives. They're meant to offset the costs. The small school grants, this has been probably one of the most confusing and politicized part of this law, because it scares the hell out of small schools. They get grants. The legislature's decided small schools are valuable. All the data shows that small schools are valuable. All the data shows that lower income students perform better in small schools. And they're obviously important to the economic and cultural life of the community. The small school grants, the way it's set up right now, you have to apply for them, and until 2019, you have to apply for them if you want one. Every time that Guilford got a grant, they had to apply for it. Every time Putney got a grant, or any other state in the school, they had to apply for it. Every year you apply for it. It's not automatic. What changes is if you merge, that money becomes automatic. It gets put into the budget of the merged district. So it's not lost. If you don't merge, and this came out of the state board, I think a month ago, when they talked about the small school grants, that after 2019, you will have to continue to apply. It doesn't say you're not going to get a small school grant. That's not what the law says. That's not the way the regulations are set now. They listed some, and I asked Dan MacArthur to fill in the gaps if people have questions about it, because they just found out they're still on the list of people who are geographically isolated and would still get the small school grants. But they have not established the criteria, to my knowledge, yet for what you're going to have, what criteria will be to get a small school grant. We know it's going to be classes of 20 or less, I think, at each level, but that's really the only criteria at this point. You just have to be small. And it's going to be a legislative and administrative decision about what those criteria are. So the loss of small school grants has been one of those red herrings that's just been tossed out there to scare people, and it's really frustrating that the political pressure from Montpelier has focused on those kinds of tactics.
So
Current legislators not included.
So let me ask it this way, or let me see if I can summarize it so I can understand.
Bob,
okay.
You want to just summarize that one?
Summarize where I am right now.
Because there's more about the savings.
Is that the law provides for certain incentives and for certain grant money and for certain savings, but it's not altogether sure whether those are definite or not. Some are contingent upon other things.
Well, the tax incentives are there. That's part of the law that comes in, and whether you want to play semantical games and say, well, it's a tax incentive, or some people have called it outright a bribe, it's there. It's in the law. And essentially, if our tax rate goes up, which it well may, because the taxes have to be paid for across the state, and there's a lot of places that are getting this tax incentive. Those who have passed get the tax break. Those who have not don't. To me, it's the same as saying that's the sale price of a can of soup, and that's the sale price. And if I want to pay for the can of soup, it's either $1 a can or it's 80 cents a can because it's on sale. That's what it is. And I look at the tax incentive just point blank that way.
So here's a question that came to me, and I put a few extra words in it, so I'll state it both ways. Where then will the savings come from? I said, where in the budget will the savings come from? So I guess the question really is, so tax incentives we understand, they're in the law. The rest of the savings, where will they come from?
Want me to go ahead?
Or-
Makes more sense. So I would love to sit here and say to everybody, here you go, take the budget, look at page 4, line 47, and that line is going to go from $100,000 to $50,000. Now, it's $50,000. Now let's go to page 6 and just rack up money after money and show it to you that exact way. I would really, really love to be able to do that. But that's not how the merger works. And further, it's not how the special education mandate money worked either. Remember that I noted that special education consolidation was mandated. It was not something that administrators or school boards wanted to do. We weren't looking to do it. It was forced upon us by the state. But guess what? It saved money. And it saved money because staff was better utilized from central and strategic planning. So when you look at our budget, which is somewhat frustrating as a school board member sometimes, and you try to control it, you can play with all sorts of things. Maybe you can look at snow plows and expenditures on new playground equipment. But 80 to 85% of our budget is in people and in staff, and their benefits and their outright salaries. So you can watch pennies on snow plowing, but that's not going to be the lion's share of where the budget is. So you look at where you can affect the budget, and this is where the special education savings comes back to how does this work under a merged system. So let's just look at numbers. What happens when you have one blip year of students? What happens when one year has lots more kids or lots less kids than other years? So I looked actually at our numbers right now in Brattleboro. And we have about 17 to 20 kids in almost all of our classes in the 3 schools. In other words, there's about 103 kids in most of the grades. There's 104 in kindergarten, 103 in first grade, 103 in second grade, 104 in fourth grade, 115 in fifth grade. And then there's the third graders and the sixth graders, and there's only 91 of each of those. So in Brattleboro, for each grade, we have 3 classes at Academy, 2 at Green Street, 1 at Oak Grove. That means we have 6 classes throughout. And that brings us to an average of about 17 in kindergarten, first, second, fourth, 19 in fifth grade, and only 15 in third grade and sixth grade. And if we made it, say, an average of 18 kids in third grade and sixth grade, guess what? We only need 5 classrooms instead of 6. So are we going to suddenly get rid of a sixth grade teacher or a third grade teacher just for this year? And then next year the blip goes away, and then next year we get rid of some sort of a 7th grade teacher perhaps, or maybe we get rid of a 4th grade teacher. That's a lot of upheaval, it's a lot of turmoil, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, we'll all tell you that the numbers of students goes up and down every single meeting we watch. So what if you looked at this from a supervisory union-wide scale? What if we looked at all of the teachers, the classroom teacher, the para-educator, the support staff that goes along with that? What if we looked at all the schools? Maybe we'd be able to look at the 6 kids who are in first grade right now for the entire first grade enrollment in Dummerston. Or the 9 kids that are in kindergarten in Guilford this year. Or how about the 26 kids that are in 4th grade at Dummerston, hiring 2 teachers, and at Academy we only have 50 4th graders with 3 teachers. So there's not an easy, fast answer to this question, which goes directly to how do we attain a better cost savings. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, next year exactly this number of kids will be here. But as a merged system, that's where we can adjust much easier. We can use our biggest resource, our trained, qualified staff, much more effectively. Now, please hear me on this part. The proposed merger does not immediately assume that we're going to eliminate X number of teachers to somehow correct the ratio. If the merger did, again, it would be a whole heck of a lot easier for all of us on the study committee to say to you, exactly this number, this line, this change. But what we do know, based on how the normal way our schools work, is that the supervisory union-wide, we have an attrition rate of about 5%. The goal of the merger is to allow a system as a whole to plan, to look at attrition, to look at staffing needs, to look at how we best provide for the education of all our kids. And what we also know is that given a mandate to change the way special education services were delivered, we saw savings to the tune of $300,000 in 2016 and $700,000 in the following year of 2017. We're 700 employees in this supervisory union, with 350 people that are not in direct teaching positions, but in academic support, special ed, paraeducators. There's a lot of opportunities there to better address staffing utilization. And our goal is to look at that as a unit. And the conclusion from central office is that 1 to 5%, and we're only putting into our proposal 1%, would be a reasonable expectation of cost savings.
So the merger may give us more flexibility, but we've already saved without the merger.
So, a bunch of those things. With the numbers that you used, Jill, where there's a smaller number of students in one of the grades, the question then is, do you move the kids to a school where they, like move the kids down to Guilford where they also have a smaller number? Or do you move the teacher to Guilford? I don't think we would want to be moving the kids. But you make it sound like because we're merged, this can all be done easily. Teachers have contracts. And right now, we can't do that. We can't just say we need to move you to Dummerston, and there's no guarantee that if our numbers are down, Dummerston is going to need another sixth grade teacher. And as far as the attrition, if you have a high school math teacher retire and you've got a smaller number of you need to have a reduction at the sixth grade level, how is that going to work? I mean, it sounds like, oh yeah, if it's all glommed together, we'll be able to plan, but you can't plan your student numbers. You can't plan retention. That's up to the individuals that choose to retire. And you have to renegotiate that's another one of the expenses, is renegotiating a contract that gets teachers to say, yeah, fine, I'll sign a contract to work in the school, and if you need me to go someplace else, I will. That all has to be negotiated. It may be possible to do that right now. We may find teachers are willing to move. There are, so anyway, there's that. The other thing is about the special ed, is that one thing you said that wasn't correct. We actually did, and Lyle had a lot to do with this. We consolidated special ed a year ahead of the state's mandate, and we were in the process of doing it before the state even came up with that idea. And in that first year, while we were consolidated, we also changed the delivery model. And for kindergarten, first, and second grade students, rather than when the deficit was identified, immediately sending them off to be tested for special ed, the teachers tried a series of interventions that they had available to them. They consulted with special educators. They used the staffing, the support staff, and the paraeducator staff in the classrooms to see if they could bring those kids along without having to assign them to special ed. And that happened, I believe, just in Brattleboro. It may have happened in other towns that first year, but it was only in our school that year. And that change in the model coincided with the $300,000 savings. And that $300,000 savings, if you look at the final budget reports, that $300,000 is in the Brattleboro Town School budget. It's not across the SU. That consolidation did not save $300,000 across the SU. It saved it in Brattleboro. It's at the bottom line of that 2016 or 2015 or 16 report. I'm not sure the FY. We changed the model. Now, where the other $400,000 came from this year, I don't know if it's combining staff, if it's more efficient. We haven't had any information about how well that's working, by the way. We haven't really gotten any feedback in terms of the effectiveness of it from parents or from staff that I'm aware of. But the change was in what the services that we delivered and the way we delivered services, and that's where that first year savings came from in Brattleboro. I wanted to get, there were a couple of more things.
I think it'd be good, though, to let Lyle or Frank actually respond to that, because you're questioning numbers. that Frank has given me. So I think it would be decent to have Frank actually respond.
I'm wondering if we can maybe agree to disagree, or to at least come to some sort of understanding about the cost savings question and move on to how this will affect students. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm gathering is that the merger may give us the potentiality to be more flexible, and to be more flexible, maybe by analogy to the special ed process, gives you the ability to move resources around. But it doesn't guarantee that, because there are restrictions on that, there are contracts, there are physical, maybe impossibilities of moving folks around.
So I'd say that's a good, almost there,
Okay.
good summary. Because the one thing that cannot happen now, and that gets to the next question of the kids, and what's very positive for the kids. Right now, you cannot move children from one school district to another, and you cannot move teachers from one district to another. I also point out that we can, in Brattleboro currently, say to an academy teacher, we want you to suddenly teach at Oak Grove, et cetera, and we never have. So the idea that we'll suddenly be yanking people around and just throwing it into a upheaval, I don't think is very rational or to be expected. If we have a long history of not doing it in Brattleboro, why would we suddenly do it as a merged
I don't either,
unit?
which indicates that it's really not such a big problem that we need to give up our local school districts and
But it
local
does-
governance
but-
to solve the problem.
But the other part of the special education, as you were indicating, Robert, is that we have seen the ability to better utilize staff when we put that together. And I think Brattleboro is to be congratulated that we're doing it, that we saw what was coming down the pike and we put it into place a little bit earlier. But it was going to be a mandate.
So let me jump in and ask. So what are the benefits of the merger for students, or what effects for students? And whoever wants to jump in first.
You want to go ahead, David, or your concern?
Well, I don't see, I guess I would make sort of a blanket statement that the benefits that the study committee talks about, and the improvements and the opportunities that are in the document are available right now. We could do that right now. We could also agree to share staff right now. The school boards have all the powers of a municipality. We can enter into contracts. We can move kids around, which we wouldn't want to. When I mean moving kids, if a student, one of the things that the committee has talked about is if a family moved, students in school in Dummerston, the family moves to Brattleboro for employment or whatever, to be closer to other family members. It would be really better for the kid if they could stay in Dummerston. That is a contractual agreement we could make. There's no reason to change anything to do that. And I don't see anything in the articles that's projected as an opportunity that is not currently possible under statute and under the local school district model, except the savings on the audits. And there's no question that having one audit instead of 6 or 7 or however many, it wouldn't be one if there's, well, however many it would be. It would cost less money. But I'll point out that the town last year put our auditing out to bid, and we dropped, I think the cost went from somewhere around $60,000 to $18,000. I'm not sure of the numbers, but it was a significant drop. And it was primarily when we talked to the vendor and said, are you sure these numbers are really different? He said, well, your books are in such good shape that it's really, this is how much time we think it's going to take. That's a sound number. And it turned out it was a sound number. So if your books are in good shape and we contract and put that out to bid, we can save some money in auditing anyway. But at the most, it's going to save $40,000. Again, is that enough? Is that enough of a savings and of a convenience to get rid of a system that's worked so effectively? You talked about us being ahead on the special ed. We've been a model for any number. The dual enrollment came out of this supervisory union. We've been supporting pre-K education, the preschools, the daycares in the community for years, and now that's a mandate. Now the state is providing some support for that. Those are all things that we always have done, and I think just another argument for why fix something that not only doesn't need fixing, but that's been really an excellent model for decades. It's a big chance to take on promises and hopes and speculation, frankly.
So back to students, what's the effect on students in this process?
So the benefits and the effects of the consolidation for our students. First off, more choice for parents as to where kids go to school. I don't know, David, you're saying that we can suddenly send kids if we made some sort of a contractual agreement? We've never supported that in the time you and I have been on the board, of a parent coming to us, and we've had it, where parents come and said, I live on Sunset Lake Road and I could get to Academy really fast, but I need to go all the way to Dummerston and it takes me a lot longer and my kid's on the bus. Can I come to Academy? And we said, no, that's not what's happening.
Right, because we never ever sat down with Dummerston and talked about having that sort of we never talked
But
between
it's not
school
in,
boards.
it's in
until
our
this
advantage to be with more kids. It's in Dummerston's advantage to have more kids because we all get our funding back from the state according to the number of kids we have.
process. But is it about funding or what's best for kids?
But if we merged, we could have that discussion, so that Sunset Road family could have that discussion then?
Not only would they have it,
Or
it would
no?
be guaranteed that they could discuss that. Now, we can't say that every person gets to absolutely get what they have. We've put in that, it has to go through the board's approval, because if you suddenly have everybody wanting to go to one school, we're going to have an imbalance there. So we'd have to have a few checks and balances. But yes, under a merged system, that's a choice. People could say, I want my kid to go somewhere. Which, interestingly, right now, Dummerston and Putney both have their own small 7th and 8th grade middle schools. We have BAMs for the rest of us. And there's certainly parents that I know in Putney that have been looking for a way to get their kid to BAMs, and they can't do it without paying. And there may well be kids in Brattleboro that say, I really would prefer a smaller school environment, and I'd rather have my kid up there. So that's a choice that could happen out of a merger. Does not happen now. And David's idea of having everybody sit down and have a contract, maybe. It leads me to the next one, which is talking about sharing staff. And right now, Brattleboro and Guilford, because as David points out, we're pretty good at this. We do look for stuff. But Brattleboro and Guilford right now share an art teacher. That was with a little bit of pushing and prodding from the central office folks. But we happened to hit a moment where we needed a 3-day-a-week art teacher at Green Street, and Guilford already had employed a 2-day-a-week teacher for art. Perfect. It happened to match, and it happened to work out, and the skies aligned, and everyone's thrilled, especially probably the art teacher. So one of the things that happens for our kids, we can have more qualified staff that wants to work here. When you can say, oh, look, there's a full-time position because we're at a merged system, and we know that we're going to utilize you in these different ways. As opposed to maybe it all works out, which it did with the art teacher.
Can I just respond to that one thing, Joe? Right now, the supervisory union employs a human resources person, and they put ads in School Spring for jobs. And if it's clear that that person would know, or could easily know, that there are 2 schools looking to hire a half-time person, and it would just be a matter of advertising one full-time art position, 2 sites, 2 settings, or 61 building, 40 another building, to let people know that it's within this district. We don't have to merge to be able to.
Except that it's not just that easy, because there are 2 employers. So it's 2 sets of interviews, it's 2 sets of teachers or staff that are making that decision. It's 2 retirement plans, it's 2 health insurance plans, it's 2 employers. It sounds really good that we could suddenly somehow say, yay, we're all going to work together. I don't believe it as much as you do that it would suddenly happen. It's also counter to our best interest. If our best interest is Brattleboro right now, and all we're really worried about is how is the best way to get our teacher, are we going to sit here and say, you know what, Guilford, it's the best thing for you to have this teacher on Monday, Tuesday. We'll make it work for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If it's a merged system, then we're mandated, all of us, as a merged system, to look at all the kids. So I'd like to continue with the list of
the part-timer may not have health insurance, right?
The part-timer will be
will have-
Usually,
be
yes.
shared by both districts.
So moving on, though, we
So-
can also look at some other benefits for kids, if you wish. one of the things that we think is the after-school programming and summer school opportunities that can expand programming because we can share that, and it wouldn't be a cost of an entire program for one school that doesn't have it now. We think that there'd be a more cohesive transition between the elementary schools and the middle schools, or the middle school to the high school, because you are all looking at all the kids all the time. We really think that we're going to be able to hire more qualified staff when a position's full-time, particularly at the middle school level, because that requires special licensing and teacher training. And then there's access to Title I for Dummerston and Vernon, which is important intervention, particularly for the middle school level, that they can't apply for now. And then the ability to stay within the school, not only to have school choice, but right now if a kid, and we track these numbers, we know this happens, if a kid needs to leave because the family has decided that they're no longer living in Brattleboro, but they're moving over to Guilford, then they move in the middle of the year and they go to Guilford. And we have research that we've looked at, David remembers it, I'm sure too, it was quite impressive that the longer we have the kid in the same school, the better off the kid does. I mean, it's kind of not anything surprising, but if we can do that within our supervisory union, that's better.
I think those are some really good examples of things that we need to be doing. And one of the things that is very valuable about Act 46 is it requires us to say specifically, directly, and whether it's in a merger or in an alternative structure, you have to say that we are responsible for all the students, for whatever geographic area it's going to encompass. I'm not sure exactly why the Newfane or the Marlboro students were not responsible for them, but there's a history to that. If we did an alternative where representatives from the school board sat down and talked about all of the things you talked about that we can't do now, that we can do those things. We have the statutory power to do those things. The law requires that if we do an alternative, we're responsible for all the students. So that would have to happen under an alternative as well. There's really would be no difference. Same with the summer program, the same with all the things that you mentioned. The difference is, would you rather have a board of 9 people, heavily weighted toward one body, or the local committees you talked about, the teachers and the community people that get together to hire the art teacher, or the school board member and the parent that come to sit down with other boards to talk about what to do about this kid that really is a lot closer, and it would make a lot more sense for that family, for that kid to stay in Dummerston. Those kinds of things. Who do you want making that decision? We have never talked about those things before. We never had a law that forced us to do it. We do have that law now. Whether it's an alternative where we make these changes to the supervisory union structure we have now, or whether we go with the consolidated, large, centralized board that's going to have all these facilities to look out for, is going to be overwhelmed with information, going to be heavily reliant on the administration and attorneys, and is going to have, similar to the study committee, which had an incredible amount of work to do, very little time to listen to public input. Which model do you want solving those problems you just listed?
So I think this is a segue to another question, which is, how would parents and community members make their views known to a consolidated board? And I think there's been some talk about leadership council.
Yes, yeah.
Now, how does the leadership council relate to the consolidated school board if, in fact, there's a merger?
So I think what David's pointing out is something that the study committee actually took really seriously. And leadership councils comes out of a lot of different people's ideas and melding together. The idea for a leadership council is that in each school, which is different than Brattleboro's school board right now, it actually increases in Brattleboro by quite a number. Each school would have a leadership council. And specifically, if you look at our school board now, I had a child in elementary school all the way through the time I've served until this year. We've now graduated to middle school. David used to have a child, but his is second year in college. Yeah.
She took a gap year.
Oh, she took a gap year, sorry. So the end of the story for me is that this is better. The Leadership Council involves direct parents. It involves staff, which right now I've been to, Academy was my kid's school, and I've been to the parent meetings all the years there, and it's pretty sparsely attended, if ever, by staff besides an administrator. So we're parents and staff on the Leadership Council, and a community member, which has been largely what the school board has been. And it's at least 5 and up to 7 is our recommendation. Each school would be able to choose exactly how that plays out. So there's a direct way for the parents and concerned community members to be involved in that school. Again, in Brattleboro, this is kind of a big change. It's not so big for Dummerston or Guilford or Putney that already has one school, and their school board tended to pull more directly from parents. Brattleboro would have Academy, Green Street, and Oak Grove, also the Early Head Start program, and the Head Start program. By the way, those policy councils are already mandated by federal law to receive those funds. We also, remember, have the Head Start up in, and Early Head Start up in Westminster, and they're part of the policy council as well. And then we would have BAMS, the Career Center probably has their own, and BUHS. So there's a lot of opportunities mandated under our proposal that's up for a vote for a lot of input and local community support.
Let me throw a question, which I think there's a hidden question in this question. So, but the question as it came to me was, if the merger requires equality of opportunity, what would happen if one school received a grant for a specific project, say for an artist in residence? Would that school be able to accept that grant? In other words, would the consolidated school board have to accept that grant and somehow reallocate that funding?
So I guess I was confused by this question. Maybe I'm not seeing it. But we already have that in Brattleboro Town Schools, where Green Street just got money from McDonald's, right? That they were doing a special. So to me, that would just continue the same way.
Yeah, under either structure, the money comes through the just like with the town. We get a grant from the Department of Agriculture or Transportation or whatever. It comes, or for the Wyndham Windsor Housing, it comes through the town. We don't keep it. It goes to where it's
And it's
where
earmarked
the grant,
for that purpose.
Yeah, and typically
Okay.
these, unless it's a large, like a after-school program grant that's in multiple schools, then it would come, it would be a supervisory union grant or a centralized grant for everybody. But if it was one school that wanted to have an artist or resident, the granting entities, it's for a small group of people, for a small project, a small amount of money. So they would be able to, if somebody had a teacher as a great grant writer and they were getting a bunch of stuff, I'm sure they would be able to do that. People would want to hire that grant writer on Saturdays and Sundays.
We're about a quarter of. I really want to get to alternatives. I don't know if the audience has any burning question that they might have that they've been sitting on. But let me go to the fourth question under alternatives. Would a no vote on the ballot question on November 7th force a reconsideration or a consideration of alternatives? Would a no vote cause the State Board of Ed to impose a plan which might be worse than what we might agree is doable for us?
So
Is that, I don't know if that's a fair question.
I think I'll take it, David, just because we talked about this at school board on Wednesday night, and it wasn't crystal clear in David's mind or my mind, so we took this to Donna Russo-Savage, who's the chief explainer for the state. I don't know, she has an official title, but that's what I call her.
Well, she also wrote most of the law.
So this is her answer to that. She says, in a nutshell, although there's a lot more to this answer, but we'll give you the nutshell. She said, by December, if there's a no vote, by December 26th, the school board of each district that won't be a part of a newly unified governance structure by July 1st, 2019, must perform the 3 tasks listed in the response up above, which are essentially writing a proposal to the level that our proposal is already written. So by the end of December 26th, an entirely different proposal would have to be written, which mirrors what this one is, which took 2 years to put together. A Section 9 proposal can be submitted before that, and the agency will give feedback. Through May, the secretary would review and have conversations with the school boards about them, and the school boards can supplement or amend the proposals as necessary. She also noted that the school boards can choose to just simply send up and say, what's in this proposal, even though it didn't pass in all towns, this is what we want. As an aside, I think it's right to mention that my understanding from both Guilford and Putney is that that would be their route, that they would say, move forward. Their school boards are in favor of this. Also, our school board did vote in favor of this proposal in June to send it forward.
Wait. We voted to put it before the voters. We did not vote to support it or say that we agreed to it. We've never voted on whether we support merger or not. We voted to put it in front of the voters. Very different.
I won't argue with that. That we did vote to move it forward, and we kind of sidestepped the question of exactly what we all felt about it at that time. So if it doesn't pass, we would have to have that conversation and decide as a school board where it would go. So then by June of 2018, the secretary issues a proposed statewide plan that may or may not incorporate any of the other proposals, which could be, as we said, Putney, Guilford sending this one forward or something new. She also makes a note, not in this, but up earlier, that while the legislators never actually considered a non-school board entity sending up a proposal, if someone from the community did send up a proposal, then they would look at that. She's sure, but it wasn't actually considered that somebody else would want to do that. And then through November 29th of 2018, the secretary or the State Board of Education review and take testimony about the proposals. The school boards again can supplement or amend, and by November 30th of 2018, the State Board of Ed would issue a statewide plan that may or may not incorporate any of the proposals. Note, there is no other approval process for Section 9 proposals. Also note in this, what was clear to me yesterday, and I don't know if I'd gotten this before, and we were mumbling about that on Wednesday night, there's no other vote.
Correct.
By the townspeople. This is our only vote. So after this, it all becomes between the school boards and the state, and then the state has final say.
So do I understand this correctly, that a no vote would mean that, well, it might not force negotiation, it would force some sort of a process, which would include further public input, but would be controlled by the State Board of Ed to decide?
No,
I don't think so.
No?
Exactly, no. It would,
Can you
if the merger,
rephrase that for me?
If the merger's voted down, there are probably a lot more things that could happen, but it seems like either the school boards will decide to try to get together and try and find some other kind of merger, or get together and try and find what we could do with the current model to create the Section 9 alternative and send that up to the state, and then go through the December through May negotiations and the May through November testimony. Or we'd all kind of sit around and say, well, let the state decide, and we would do nothing, and then the state would probably send back the Articles of Agreement and say, here's your structure.
I think I agree with David.
Yeah.
That's basically it. And one of the things that's interesting in this is that, it's 2 years, and it's been a process with a lot of public input. Although if I were not involved, I would not be coming to the table until now and thinking about it, because it's been a lot of back and forth and trying to understand it. It's not an easy thing to pull together. The folks that are working with the alternative structures are doing the similar process to what we've already done. And so we and Brattleboro School Board put David and Kim. Kim has been on the both of them now. She's been on this study committee for 2 years, and a glutton for punishment has moved on to this one. Because we as an entire school board thought it behooved us. We are the largest amount of kids in the supervisory union. So try to figure out what the other is in case this doesn't get passed. In order to be passed, it does have to be passed in all of the towns.
A burning question that I had. What was the reasoning for giving Brattleboro a supermajority on the consolidated board? And I should also note here that there are very few names on the ballot on question 2 for the Consolidated Board. But the real question is, and maybe it's an unfair question, do you know the reasoning behind that?
Yes,
You do?
sure. It's law. It's the whole representation based on population idea.
Just by population then, so.
Well, so then we argued back because, and if you watch the study committee's meetings, Brattleboro, Kim, Mark for a long time, and I, and now Spoon, but we've been largely Switzerland and stayed neutral on this because we recognize this is a big idea and concern for the outlying towns. So we supported whatever could come out of it that made the most sense for everybody. So in the end, I'm not sure I term it as a supermajority because that seems to me like overwhelmingly always every situation. As it sets right now, it's Brattleboro has 4 members. Each of the outlying towns, which is Dummerston, Putney, and Guilford, have 4 members. And then we tried to make it as fair as possible, and we pushed really hard on legal counsel, and they weren't thrilled, but we kept pushing. And we came up with an at-large members. And so those 2 members can be from any town. So it is therefore possible that 3 members could be from, say, Putney or Guilford or Dummerston if they had more people running. And then the question becomes, okay, so then Brattleboro still has 4 versus 3 from one town, if that's the case. So then I guess the assumption that's being made that the study committee couldn't really understand either is that everybody from Brattleboro would always vote the same. And I don't know that that's true. Dave and I obviously have differences of agreement on this.
Well, not until Act 46.
Well, we've always had our own brains, so put it that way.
We've disagreed for 8 years.
But it's I don't see that people always vote. And then I guess I would hearken back to how the Brattleboro Union High School Board is, in that it too comes with different representation, but the overarching thought always, and Ricky's nodding his head out there as the board chair, it's always about the kids. So I don't think that people run for school board and say, I'm only going to run for Brattleboro kids, and every decision that I make would be on Brattleboro kids. It certainly has not been true in the way that the folks that are working on the alternatives and the people that have been sitting at the study committee have been acting. Nobody has ever only been worried about their own town.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a big difference between the consolidated board and the high school board, though. The high school board oversees basically one cluster of buildings and facilities, and they're all in one town and in one place. It's different than having 4 or actually 7 additional facilities to deal with, and a whole lot. Well, anyway.
Yeah, so in that way, it's more
kids.
similar to the Brattleboro Town School Board.
And it's half as many kids as they
where
want
the
to be.
Brattleboro Town School Board, I was an academy parent, and actually most of us have been academy parents throughout the years.
Lately, yeah.
But we've always been concerned about Oak Grove and Green Street too.
I saw a
But there
hand
are-
in the audience for a question.
Just that there are issues that come up, I think particularly around taxes, which would, because of the size of Brattleboro compared to the other towns, a situation like that would be much more possible, because the Brattleboro, well, if we get to those charts, it'll become more clear. But the tax, there's such a difference in tax rates that I think it's not inconceivable that Brattleboro voters would say, no, we're not going to support something in a budget because it's really, our tax rate has just gone off the charts. But and that's what happened with the Waste Management District. So it's hard to know what's going to happen. The potential is there.
I saw a hand with a question, if you could use the mic
Oh, sure. Thank you.
And identify himself.
and identify yourself, if you care to, Chris.
Sure. My name's Chris Chapman. I live in Brattleboro, and I've been living here a long time. Was born here 61 years ago. The observation from my perspective as a taxpayer and a town meeting rep and a former select board member is that this law was passed from a motivation to save money, primarily to save money because of skyrocketing personnel costs and while at the same time we're seeing a slow regression in the population of students across the board in our state. Certainly in all the rural areas, of which Brattleboro, frankly, is one compared to Burlington. And there's been a promise of savings as a result. That was the motivation, I understand, for the act. Mr. Scholes has sown doubt in my mind about that with a considered email that he sent around. And that has sown doubt in my mind. But when I listed, my my credentials here as a person speaking, it's as a town meeting rep where I am responsible to vote on 2/3 of the budget. But our vote as town meeting reps is going to go away if we adopt this program that has been put in front of us under Act 46. I have a huge issue with that from a historical perspective. Brattleboro has a representative town meeting because it's too big to actually have a town meeting. We don't have a facility big enough to fit all the voters. And the enormous part of the lion's share of our budget goes to the schools, and that's going to be taken away from us. And the town meeting is actually where the rubber really meets the road between the school board and the community, because of the enormous complexity of the school administration and budget. So it seems to me that we're not actually assured of the savings intended in the law, and we are assured that the voters are going to lose direct control over that budget, regardless of the uncomfortable fact that the actual budgets proposed are done in votes that are sparsely attended. Nevertheless, the loss of direct control by the town meeting is something that bothers me to the point where I simply cannot sit still and take it.
So
I'm wondering if you could,
either
of you has a comment on that.
Did you have a question? Or is it?
I have some comments back,
Do you
and I have a question for
Do you want to
Chris.
comment back?
I have a question for Chris.
So you'll be interrogated, Chris.
Well, that's okay.
What is it then when you say you're losing direct control? What control do you think you're losing?
The vote
On
how
what?
much we are going to be taxed for the schools.
Okay.
It's huge.
So
Now,
I have
I'm
some
speaking-
answers back.
Okay, and it's a huge concern of mine. It's not so much a question, but I think this is that this concern really should be put forth, even if there isn't a question. And my perspective is from a person who is still in the workforce but approaching retirement, and you know that in retirement you simply don't have the same income unless you've been extremely shrewd and fortunate.
And working with a good banker, like the Vermont Trust Company.
That's right.
Well, thank you. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So-
I'm
I'd love to
concerned
answer
about
that. I think
So-
it's a good
greatly
question.
concerned about the future of the budget, over which, if I vote yes, I'm going to lose control.
So Jill has a response to your concern, I think.
Should I stay standing up? Are you
Or
interrogating?
did you
I
ask
think
your
I've done.
question?
I've answered my question. You
Yeah.
can sit back down if you want, Chris. So I think this is a great question, and it's one that I hear raised. So thank you for questioning it. When we go as a town meeting, we first have that discussion the Wednesday prior, where we can go through all of the budget. Now, what happens at every single one of those town meetings, informational meetings, is that somebody pops up and says something about the high school. Every single year that I've been there. But guess what? We only are looking at Brattleboro town schools, right? So here's some of the things that I like about this. And we continue, and we've thought about this really hard because this is a real big issue for a lot of folks. We continue with those town informational sessions. Those don't go away. so that that information and that look at drilling down and the presentation to the town that I think has been so fruitful and so frankly fulfilling a lot of times as a school board member, but also I think for the staff to be able to explain, why do we ask for this money? What are we able to do? What have we changed? What are we getting for outcomes? And how do we think we're literally changing the world one person at a time? I mean, it's powerful stuff. That's not going away because that'll continue at that meeting. Here's what does change that I also think is kind of good. Right now, who votes on it in Brattleboro? Only the Brattleboro town reps. What will happen is the whole town gets to vote. And guess what? We don't just vote on the Brattleboro elementary budget, but we're going to be voting on the high school as well. And we're going to be voting on the SU budget. Right now, how does the SU budget get put together? Finance committee made up of all the local school board reps, and then it comes back to the supervisory union committee, which is a couple of us from each one of the local school boards. And that's it. It doesn't have public scrutiny beyond that. And it's a bunch of $1 million, Frank. 7, 8? 18, even worse. Well, anyway, 18. It's because we switched that special education spending in there. So that's a good chunk of money that doesn't see much scrutiny and will now. I think that's a positive. The other portion is the Brattleboro Union High School budget. Ricky, how many people came last year?
It was like maybe less than 2% of the voting population.
So guess who gets to vote on that now? All of us. And we also will have an entire budget that, yeah, okay, it includes Dummerston, it includes Guilford, it includes Putney in this merged budget. Is it big? Sure. Do I think that the taxpayers are incapable of looking at a bigger number and figuring it out? No, I think we can do that. So the direct control, I mean, that's the question that I've struggled with and why I asked you, Chris, what exactly do we think we're doing at that town meeting? Because if somebody does, as they did 2 or 3 years ago, David, remember let's take $1 million out of the
See what
budget?
happens, yeah.
So what would have happened if that passed? I think when the person said it and then the discussion, there was some indication of what they thought should be cut, but that doesn't happen from the town reps. All that happens is you cut the money and then you throw it back to the school board or the administrators to figure out where to cut the money. So it's not direct control, it's just direct control over whether you think the budget's yes or no. So that's not changing and it's actually increasing. And I also think that with the leadership councils, you get, and I've talked to staff that like this, you get an even more inputted budget, if that's a word. The staff would be part of the leadership council, so when the budget requests come from Green Street School, there's a staff member and a community member and the parents, and they're all putting input into that budget that comes back up to the level, and there's direct relationship. It's in the articles for the leadership council to talk to the merged school board, the larger entity. And also that board has to go to different schools and actually meet in the different schools. They don't just meet in one place.
I have to have a sidebar with my timekeeper. Catherine? We're okay? I see 2 hands up. The first hand was in the back row. Mr. Stuckey?
I just wanted to thank the committee for...
There's a microphone up at front if you could. Otherwise...
Byron Stuckey, I just wanted to thank the committee for an impressively generous amount of work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Here, really.
George?
George Carville, West Brattleboro. Strikes me that a lot of this is really philosophical, how we think things ought to go. I was a resident of Brattleboro for many years, moved away, come back recently, and I wasn't here for the Act 46 legislative side of it and how it all came together. Your question about taxes, I'd like to point out that Putney, Dummerston, and Guilford will be voting on taxes for Brattleboro schools. It goes both ways. But anyway, back to the philosophy. As I understand it, Act 46 was strongly supported by the Vermont School Board Association, nod of head is good enough up there. Am I right on that?
Yep.
I did understand that. And a lot of their proposals come from ALEC, the American group.
American
Well,
legislature.
There's similarities.
Similarities.
Nobody's established a direct line.
Direct line.
Yeah.
But there's a connection there between ALEC and so, and of course, ALEC is supported by the Koch brothers. So I'm kind of wondering how much Koch brother influence there is on the creation of Act 46.
Do you have an answer, David?
No,
I have no
it's
Uh,
the efforts that, at least the ones I understand or have read about for that organization is to their efforts to influence legislation, and they generally are looking to concentrate power. There's no question about that. Whether they had agents undercover in the legislature,
I don't know. Do
couldn't
they
say.
care about Vermont? Do we make enough? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Molly's been
Molly?
I'd just like to weigh in on this because I was there when we voted on Act 46. And I believe, and not knowing if there were other sort of nefarious motives floating around, but I believe it did come from a Democratic administration to address school costs. There was a lot of, in the election before that, there was a lot of, even the years before that, there were some sort of incentives for districts merging. I forget what they called it, but it was a voluntary thing. And then there was a lot of concern about school costs and what can we do about it. And I do think it came from, not from a, let's sort of take over the schools, but I think it was a genuine concern. It was hugely controversial. And there were a lot of people in the caucus supported by the Democratic leadership that did not vote for it and that were very concerned about it. And so it wasn't a unanimous thing, but I think it did. I think the motives came from a place of trying to address a problem, not from a,
yeah.
And who knows, as I'm saying, not sure if they were sort of, I don't tend to attribute negative motives to people,
Yeah.
but anyway.
Yep,
just
and
wanted to clear that.
Yeah, and I was on the board of the School Board Association at the time that this and the effort to consolidate 2 years before. And the way it was presented to us was always the legislature is going to do something about property taxes, so we need to be involved. So, I mean, that certainly is where it came from. Maybe not having that effect, but that was the motive, yeah.
So I wanted to come back to George, to your question, or your statement really about philosophical differences on this, and that it does come down to that. One of the things that we just heard a great presentation at our school board meeting on Wednesday night from Green Street School, and one of the things I feel like I watched as a parent at Academy School was a shift from, okay, we're teaching all the kids, but there's some kids that just don't have as good a shot at making it to the top as other kids. I mean, just kind of that way we all were raised, kind of with the tacit acknowledgement that this one's going to go far, and this is a kid you really want to, and this one's got a lot of troubles. And so, we have to just acknowledge that and adjust our expectations. And whether we like that or not, I think that's a reality for how education was when we were kids. And one of the huge shifts that happened in the last few years at Academy that I've watched happen personally, and what Mark was talking about that's gone on at Green Street, and it's happened at Oak Grove, and it sounds like it may be happening in the other towns as well, is that the education is for all kids, and that we need to get to where we can bring that kid up and find out what each kid needs and provide that for that kid. It's a similar philosophical question that's faced in the Act 46. It's a huge shift that you go from, we have a local school board that's looking at Brattleboro kids, to we're now looking at all kids in the supervisory union, and we're trying to make it equitable and bring all of the kids to the same end, from pre-K all the way through. And I guess that also brings me personally back to the question that I don't think we've talked about here on the list of, if we don't vote for the proposed articles of agreement and we say no, then what are the alternatives? What do they look like? And I wondered if David might want to address that.
Well, I want to just stay with, just for a second, stay with the that focus on the students. and the philosophical changes and the intentions, and then compare that to some data that was reported by Scott Price, who's the executive director of the South Carolina School Boards Association, on states that have done this. And not consolidating that happened in the 40s and 50s, because that was a long time ago, but more recently. In Arkansas, they consolidated small districts and pledged it was going to be just administrative consolidation. That schools would remain open, and by 2015, 98 schools had been closed. Mississippi, West Virginia, and Arkansas are seeing longer travel time, less at-home time, lower rates of participation in extracurricular activities, lower rates of participation of parents in student education and in school governance. Again, the track record is that people don't get involved when the governance is moved away from them. And particularly lower achievement for lower income students nationally, where research has consistently shown that small school size is associated with greater individual attention for poor students and higher graduation rates. And I think those are, looking at the track record of people in this century that have consolidated, the goals that we all share this is not making them happen. There are possibilities and things that could come out of it that we can see would be better, but the savings have not materialized, and we've seen Chittenden East was one of the first places to merge, and their superintendent recently reported that they have not been able to realize the savings that they thought that they would. And that certainly is the case in Maine and in these other states that I just mentioned that have tried this, and with the hope that it would make a difference, but it simply doesn't provide the results that are hoped for. And I think it's important to have a direction and the philosophy and goals, but we also have to look at what really works and what the evidence indicates, data-based or research-based, and based on what's happened so far, it's just not, those goals are not being achieved by consolidating governance.
So are there feasible alternatives?
Well, yeah, and we talked about a lot of them earlier when Jill went through the improvements for the students, but the being able to work, we've never met, I know Jill agrees with this because the entire study committee has talked about it at various times, and we've talked about it as well. This meeting process, the study committee meeting process, is unprecedented. We never used to meet and talk like that with other town boards. And it's really made, I don't think that there's any way, no matter what happens, that's going to go back to what it was. I think that there's a strong desire to maintain that communication. That could happen under an alternative. Some of the tougher contract things, like if we let a kid go to another school, well, the funding goes with them. That's why that hasn't happened. Very clearly, you lose money if you lose the kid. But if the purpose is to do what's best for the kid, and that's what motivates the choice, then that has to happen, and we have to figure out ways to do that. And there are various ways to do that. But again, we'd have to work it out, and there are legal implications. There are things that have been tried, like a district fund for improvements, where districts put the money in, somebody applies to, one of the towns needs some funding for some specific thing, and the funds are available there. But things like sharing the cost of universal meals with towns that don't have a high enough level of SNAP, of food stamp recipients to qualify for free meals, giving people choice where it makes sense, a district fund, looking at class sizes and staffing, and looking at ways to share staff that makes sense. Joe talked about numbers, and are there ways that if we know we don't need a sixth grade teacher and there's somebody else that needs one, then we can try and work something out to do that. Again, it would have to be contractual, just like everything else. But there are a number of things that are possible, and there are a number of districts. The Northeast Kingdom district I talked about with 13 different, SU with 13 different districts is looking at that. There are a number of other, Washington Central, I believe it is, the area around Montpelier that's not Montpelier, is looking at a similar kind of structure. There are lots of models, there are guidelines, there are rules, it's all in place. It's just, we have to do the work.
So David, what is the plan, though? I mean, basically, I hear you saying all the same things as what the study committee has and are proposed.
Exactly.
So how do you do that?
Well, two things. One is you can do it through contracts instead of merging.
So
that
contracts
the
of
legal-
what?
Contracts between school boards. We all are empowered by the state to enter contracts that,
So to have a contract to share staff.
yeah, if we can then get the staff, the union to agree to it as well. Or to share the costs of a meals program. Or any number of things, but
So
when you ask,
if-
I have to just kind of back up a little bit, because if somebody 2 years ago, at the beginning of this process, said, what's the plan to you, what would you be able to say?
Which is why we have 2 years before we got to it.
And we have until
December
we have
26th.
until November, because that's when the public hearing part of it is. And then we have actually until July of 19.
Oh, you have till December 26th to have a full-fledged
No,
plan in front
No,
of
it's
the...
not a full plan. Read what Donna said. There's a
Go back.
negotiation that goes on between December and May, and then from May to November is the public, I think it's the public input part of it.
So I have
Read what Donna said, sorry.
a 10-minute timekeeper advisement here, but let me see if I can understand while Jill is looking that information up. If we picked and choose from the items that we have on the table for contractual agreements between school districts to share a teacher or things of that nature, if we picked and choose those things in terms of flexibility that we think would be good and beneficial, would we still gain the tax benefits under Act 46 by doing that as an alternative?
No, if
No.
we don't merge by November, whatever it is, the benefits, the incentives all go away, but so do the costs of merging. I mean, every single contract, every single.
Which we have
deed
not
and lease
identified
has
as
to
a
be
whole bunch of
redone.
costs.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We haven't found all those costs. I don't know where those costs are.
You haven't identified the costs of the merger.
We have looked at costs of the merger, and we don't find all these costs that David is saying that are there. I don't know.
And the NEK falls into a specific exception because they have a geographic dispersal, or no?
No.
And, well, there's a lot from Donna here to try to find exactly where it is. I don't know. It says the kind of data.
It's the
There's
December-
no
what has to be in by
worksheets and
December.
the name of the districts involved, the date of the merger vote. It just
I
says
thought you
it's
had to
it's
have
a
a
full.
proposal in by December of
But
this year.
December of '26, meeting the 3 points, which is these 3. Self-evaluate the district's ability to meet the educational and fiscal goals, have conversation with other districts in the region inside and out and/or outside of the SU about how to work together to improve regionally. 3, submit a proposal to the Secretary of State Board of Ed that outlines the analysis above and proposes the specific steps the district will take to improve in the goals, section 9 of the proposal. So it's a full-fledged plan. It's not just, we're going to submit you a plan. You have to address all of those questions.
Yeah.
That explains exactly how you would be able to meet all of the educational fiscal goals,
And then it does, well, it
have
does
all the
say-
conversations.
It doesn't really define the extent of it, how specific it has to be. And it doesn't say to what extent defined. It does say that from December to May, there's a process, the study committee went through with the agency, or with the state board, of developing the final process, the final document. It's not like we have to have a,
It says it reviews and has conversations, and then you can supplement or amend. But it does
Right.
say, by December 26th, the school board of each district that won't be a part of the newly unified governance structure by July 1st, that's us, if we say no, must perform the 3 tasks listed, which are those 3 that I just read.
Yep.
So I guess that's a matter of interpretation. I read that as it has to be a full-fledged proposal. David's reading that as it has to be something on paper that can then be discussed.
exactly. Yep.
So are there active initiatives right now to look at alternatives?
Well, we looked at alternatives the entire time we went through all of ours. There's entire meetings that we had, subcommittees, which actually David and I were part of that. First subcommittee on
Yeah.
looking at the alternatives, and we couldn't find an alternative that worked. The
That was
one,
2 years ago, before we had any sense of what the alternative actually was. And we
and so
were
I guess
looking at
that
a
goes
merger.
to David to exactly what they're planning now as an alternative.
Yep.
And and I still don't know if I'm understanding, I keep bugging David at
Right.
meetings, what is the actual plan? How does it work? Beyond the idea that we should work together, which is noble and laudable, but hasn't happened before now, really, and there's a bunch of reasons why it's not in our best interest to not work together.
Right, but now the law says we have to. Or they'll force us. That's
Right.
what 46 says, we have to consider all, that we're responsible for all the kids. That's what they're saying. So we have to, and the alternative plan has to do that. The Brattleboro has formally appointed 2 members to a subcommittee. Dummerston has formally appointed 2 members to a subcommittee. There are a board member who's not formally representing Putney, and 2, I think, people that have been coming from Dummerston who are, or from Guilford, who are very active in the community. And we've been trying to we're clarifying what the goals are, what the work is to put together for those 3 specifics that are required by December. The gathering data, bit by bit, updating documents that were partial or hadn't been updated from a lot of the study committee work that's from a couple of years ago, and there have been some changes. And basically gathering information to figure out how do we proceed, and then waiting basically until the merger's over for whether there's going to be any urgency or more involvement from Putney or Guilford. Or of whether, because the vote has to happen before the boards decide whether to try again for a merger. That's one thing. If there's going to be another try for a merger, then these would be competing activities. But I think after the vote, there's going to be a flurry of activity for the next 7 weeks to try and meet that deadline.
I hate to say if anybody has 3 parting words. Mine is, let's work together. Molly, you want the last word?
I just wanted to amend a little bit of what I said. You know, I was really defending, the motives of what was going on. But, it did change, and initially it was about how do we save costs, and then the discussion became how to provide equality of opportunity. And those are the 2 things really that we're talking about. I think this has been a really thoughtful discussion. I appreciate it. I did vote against the bill initially, and as I said, it was very controversial. And I really appreciate this conversation, and how do we move forward? I'm not sure, but I think what's great is that we're having this conversation in this way. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Bob.
Thank you for everyone who attended this morning.
persevering.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jill.